1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 10, where he talks about the depths of God. And I'm going to read that. For to us God revealed them through the Spirit. For the Spirit searches all things, even the depths of God. Throughout all eternity, I think we'll be searching deeper and deeper the infinite depths of God. For who among people knows the thoughts of a person except the spirit of that person, which is in them? I mean, you know your heart better than anybody else does, except for God, who knows it better than we do. Even so, the thoughts of God, no one knows except the Spirit of God. Now we've received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit is from God, that we might know the things freely given to us by God, which things we also speak, not in words taught by human wisdom, but in those taught by the Spirit, combining spiritual with spiritual. But a natural person doesn't accept the things of the Spirit of God for their foolishness to them. They can't understand them because these things are spiritually evaluated. But whoever is spiritual, who's of the Spirit, born of the Spirit, well, and paying attention, evaluates all things. It isn't evaluated by anybody. The other people don't understand this. In fact, when I first started hearing God's voice, somebody said, "Oh, you hear voices. Maybe you should be put in an institution." I was kind of scared they might be thinking of actually doing that to me, but I'm not going to give up on Jesus no matter what. But now I find out there's quite a few 100 million other people who also hear from God. But anyway, it's not appraised by anyone. For who has known the mind of the Lord that he should instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. Now, this is very interesting because he's quoting from Isaiah chapter 40, where it says, who has known the mind of the Lord? Well, the Hebrew says one thing, the Greek translation says another. One of them says, who has known the Spirit of the Lord that he may instruct him? The other says, who has known the mind of the Lord that he may instruct him? Paul knows both of the Greek and the Hebrew. He kind of blends them together here. He's been talking about the Spirit. Well, now he talks about the mind of the Lord. Who has known the mind of the Lord? The mind of Yahweh from Isaiah chapter 40, that he should instruct him. But he qualifies it, as he does a few other times in his writings. One time earlier in this chapter, and then one time in Romans 11 to 12. But see, I love the Bible so much, it's hard for me not to digress. But staying on point, he qualifies that. Who has known the mind of the Lord, that he may instruct him? But because we have the Spirit, we have the mind of the Lord, which is the mind of Christ. So, people say, Bible doesn't talk about Jesus' deity much. They don't read the New Testament in light of the Old Testament. Because, Paul keeps quoting or referring to passages from the Old Testament about Yahweh and applying them to Jesus. It's kind of obvious. But even when he says grace and peace to you from God the Father and Jesus our Lord, that's a blessing. You often open letters with a blessing, invoking a deity. It's invoking Jesus as divine. But anyway, this passage in 1 Corinthians 2, he's talking about true wisdom and how true wisdom is found in the cross. So again, in the cross, we see the foundation of this wisdom. We see God's heart, and the Spirit takes us deeper and deeper in that. One time when I was a young Christian and I felt really alone, and there was somebody that I liked, and I thought things might go in a certain direction. And it wasn't going to go that way. And I was brokenhearted. And I sat down someplace and was just pouring out my heart to the Lord. And then Jesus was there. And he embraced me. And he said, "My child, I know how it feels to be alone. I was alone when all my disciples forsook me and fled. But you're not alone because I'll always be with you." And he comforted me with his presence. But most fundamentally, he shares his heart with us. When he says, who has known the mind of the Lord? He shares his heart with us. He shares with us what matters most. And what matters most to him is people made in his image. So it's not about a method, it's about a relationship. And faith is about a relationship too. It's not a formula we make work. Actually, I saw that one time because, in my early years, after I learned to hear God's voice, it was so wonderful. I just always wanted to hear God's voice. But then I got into this teaching where whatever you say will come to pass. And I thought I had a formula. I could make it work. And my first year of Bible college, I came down with a cold and got really sick with it and was coughing in class and ended up passing out. And the school nurse and somebody else came to take me back to my room. And they said, "You need to see a doctor." I said, No, bless God, I'm healed. They said, "You need to see a doctor." And so I'm lying on my bed in my bedroom, and I'm like, "God, I believe you to heal me." And I couldn't go to a doctor anyway because I don't have any money. "Well, God, I either need you to heal me or I need you to give me money to go to a doctor." And he healed me right on the spot. But I didn't learn my lesson. So the next year, and God would often do things. I mean, he honors faith whether we get our words right or not. But my relationship with him was becoming more stale because it was more like a formula. You push a button and you make it happen. That's not the way it works. The next year, I worked in a street mission, helped in a street mission. I was walking to class one day and I passed out again. This was from something completely unrelated to what I'd had the year before. And this time they took me to a doctor because I turned purple, I'd stopped breathing. And they prayed for me and I came to, and they took me to the doctor against my protests because I still didn't have any money. And I was really embarrassed because, the bill was sent to my parents, and my parents weren't Christians, and I'd already told them that I'd lay hands on other people and they get healed, and now I had to go to a doctor. Again, it doesn't work quite that way. You already know that from other things, other lessons you've heard. But in any case, I was really embarrassed, and I was upstairs in the mission one night praying, and what I actually uttered was it was blasphemous. I'm really embarrassed to talk about it, but anyway, God didn't save me because I'm a great guy. He saved me because he's a great God. I said, "God, how could you let this happen to me? I thought you loved me." There was a moment of silence, and then he spoke just very succinctly and to the point, not like me going off in circles. "My child, I let this happen to you because I love you. As the psalmist said, before I was afflicted, I went astray." He wanted me in that fresh intimacy with him, not just pushing buttons. And that was a good reminder. Well, some people talk about the dark night of the soul. Whether we're hearing something specifically at a given time, it looks like Elijah, certainly he was hearing from God, right? Fire came down from heaven, and then he finds out Jezebel wants to kill him. And he walks for 40 days to Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai, and there's an earthquake. God is there, but God wasn't in the earthquake. There's other things. God isn't in those. But then a still small voice, like a gentle breeze. And God spoke to him, "Elijah, what are you doing here?" "Well, God, they've killed all your servants, the prophets, and I'm the only one left. I've got 7,000 in Israel who haven't yet bowed to Baal. And here's your next mission." And Elijah completes one of those directly. Elisha is a successor. Elisha completes another one of those, and then somebody he sends completes the third one. But even when you're in what people sometimes call the dark night of the soul, you still know God. If you know what God is like, you may not feel God. You may not be hearing anything at that moment, but He's still God. I was converted from atheism, and sometimes I wondered, wow, if I didn't have any faith. I mean, actually, in some of the early years, I still had these leftover questions. But once I learned how to hear His voice, I'd ask Him the questions, and He would give me answers. And so that helped me a lot. But I always wondered what would happen if I couldn't work up any faith. And the time came when I went through the deepest crisis of my life to that point as a Christian, because there was nothing worse than when I was an atheist, I had no hope. As a Christian, the worst thing could happen to me, but I still had the hope of where I'd be forever. But I was so devastated. I felt like everything had been taken from me. And yet, even though I didn't have any faith that I was working up, there was nothing in me sustaining me of my own. He was still there. I didn't feel Him, but He was there, and I knew He was real. And we know because we know who He is. And we can forget that, and He has to remind us of that too. But anyway, I learned God's heart in a special way at that time. 'Cause sometimes when we're most broken is when we're growing the most, when we feel like it the least. Sometimes when we feel like we're hanging on to God by dear life from a thread that's about to break, is when God is really working something deep in our lives. You see a lot of people in the Bible like that, like Elisha. When he knelt down under the juniper tree and said, God, just let me die. I'm no better than my ancestors. That's what God had to show me at that time. Yeah, you're even less than what you thought you were. You're just dust and ashes. But it's all right, because it's not based on who you are. It's based on who I am. Remember Exodus 3 and 4. And Moses gives objection after objection to God sending him. And one of his objections is, God, who am I that I should speak to Pharaoh? And God doesn't really answer that, who Moses is. Instead, the issue is who God is. God, who am I? I am that I am. And so we, at this time, I've said it in another context. I may as well say it here. My wife ran off with her best friend's husband. This is not my current wife. It was 15 years before I remarried. But my first wife, we'd been married for about 3 years. She ran off with her best friend's husband. I was devastated. And I was so numb at that point that I couldn't feel God's presence. I couldn't hear His voice. But once in a while I did hear His voice. It broke through. And one night I couldn't sleep. I was out walking. Actually, a police officer pulled me over, said, sir, I don't mean to disturb you, but some people reported a strange man walking in this neighborhood. Well, I'm definitely a strange man. So anyway, reported a strange man walking in this neighborhood, and I just need to check to see what you're doing. I said, I'm just out for a walk. I can't sleep. My wife left me. He said, oh man, I went through that a year ago. You just keep walking. And as I was walking, I began to feel God's heart as He spoke to me about His heart. He said, my child, she didn't do anything to you that Gomer didn't do to Hosea, and that all my people haven't done to me. Because day and night, I'm calling to my people in love. And day and night, most of my people are more consumed with all the other things that they're in love with more than they're in love with me. And He said that someday in this nation, in the U.S., He was going to strip us of the things that we valued so we could learn to value what really matters.